The sky over New Boston glowed a faint orange as the two small children, barely more than toddlers, clung tightly to each other. Their wide, luminous eyes darted nervously around the crowded market, the alien language of the humans buzzing in their ears. The siblings were identical, with pale blue skin, delicate webbed fingers, and shimmering, silvery hair that cascaded down their backs. They had no names, not in the human sense. In their culture, names were something earned over time with deeds and honor. But here, on Earth, no one knew that. To the humans who passed them by, they were just two lost, alien children, orphans, it seemed, from a refugee vessel that had crashed nearby during one of the last skirmishes between human forces and the Drak'aran Empire. That was when she found them. Evelyn Marks had always been drawn to lost causes. A former pilot in the Earth Defense Fleet, she had retired after the long war against the Drak'aran forces finally ended. She had lost friends, comrades, and even her own family to the war. And now she spent her days helping where she could, volunteering at shelters for the displaced and war-torn. When her eyes fell on the two children, sitting quietly by a vendor's stall, something tugged at her heart. They were so still, so silent, that they seemed almost invisible. But their eyes, those large, reflective eyes, looked up at her with a depth of sadness she couldn't ignore. "Are you lost?" she asked gently, kneeling down to their level. The twins said nothing, only exchanged glances. One of them, a boy, she thought, tilted his head slightly, his eyes filled with uncertainty. His sister, identical in every way except for the slightly darker shade of her silvery hair, gripped his hand tightly. Evelyn's heart broke a little at the sight. They were alone, scared, and from the looks of it, hungry. "Come with me," she said softly, extending a hand. "I'll take care of you." The twins hesitated only for a moment before they stood and took her hand. It wasn't trust exactly, but a fragile hope that perhaps this human could offer them something they needed, safety, or at least a chance to survive in a world that was not their own. Years passed, and the twins grew into their new life with Evelyn, who eventually became their legal guardian. She gave them names, Lyra and Kian, so they could fit into Earth society, though their true names were never forgotten between them. They learned the ways of humans, how to speak the language fluently, how to blend in as best they could despite their alien features. Earth had changed over the years, with many alien species integrating into society after the war, but Kian and Lyra were still different. They were quiet, reserved, and though they adored Evelyn, they always felt like something was missing, some part of them they couldn't quite grasp. One night, when they were both around 15 Earth years old, Kian began to have strange dreams. In these dreams, he was no longer in the small, comfortable home he shared with Evelyn and Lyra. Instead, he was in a vast palace, its walls made of gleaming crystal, and towering beings of light and shadow moved around him, speaking in a language he didn't understand. In these dreams, he felt powerful, as though he was meant to be more than just a boy raised on Earth. But when he woke, the memory of the dreams faded, leaving him with only a vague sense of unease. Lyra, too, had been feeling strange. She noticed things. Lights flickering when she was upset, objects moving slightly when she concentrated too hard. She didn't tell Evelyn or Kian about it, fearing she might frighten them, or worse, that something was wrong with her. It wasn't until one fateful day, when a stranger appeared at their doorstep, that the truth about their past came to light. The man who knocked on their door looked human, but something about him was off. His skin was too smooth, his eyes too bright. And when he spoke, there was a strange rhythm to his words that sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. "I'm here for the heirs," he said simply. Evelyn, protective as ever, stepped in front of the twins. "Heirs? I think you've got the wrong house." The man smiled a cold, calculated smile. "I assure you, Ms. Marks, I am in the right place. The children you've been raising, they are not who you think they are. They are the last surviving heirs to the throne of the Illyrians, a royal bloodline that was thought to be wiped out during the Drak'aran invasion." Evelyn's heart raced. "What are you talking about?" Lyra and Kian stood frozen, unsure of what to believe. Royal heirs? Them? It sounded impossible, like something out of a storybook. But deep down, they both knew there was something different about them, something they had never been able to explain. The man continued. Their parents were the last rulers of Illyria, a once great civilization, before it was destroyed by the Drak'arans. The children were sent away in secret, hidden among the refugees who fled to Earth. I've been searching for them ever since. Kian's dreams, Lyra's strange powers. It all began to make a terrible kind of sense. They weren't just refugees. They were royalty, the last of their kind, and their existence had been kept a secret to protect them from the enemies who still sought to destroy their bloodline. As the truth unfolded, the twins found themselves thrust into a world of politics and danger they had never imagined. The Illyrian throne was not just a symbol of power. It was a key to an ancient technology that could either restore their people or bring about their final destruction. And now, the Drak'arans were hunting for it, and for them. Evelyn, ever the protective mother, was determined to help them. I don't care where you came from, she said fiercely. You're my children. We'll figure this out together. But the twins knew that staying on Earth put everyone they loved in danger. They couldn't hide anymore. They had to face their destiny. And they had to choose whether to embrace the royal legacy they never wanted or find a way to forge their own path. Evelyn wasn't easily shaken, but after the stranger's revelation, she felt a pit of fear forming in her stomach. She had always known the twins were different. She just never imagined how different. That night, while Lyra and Kian slept, she sat by the fireplace, her mind racing. The words of the stranger echoed in her head. Heirs to a royal throne, ancient technology, dangerous enemies. What had she gotten them into? Morning came, and with it, more uncertainty. Lyra was the first to wake, slipping quietly into the living room where Evelyn sat lost in thought. You couldn't sleep either? Lyra asked softly, sitting down next to her. No, Evelyn replied, running a hand through her hair. It's a lot to take in, but there's something I need to ask you, Lyra. Have you ever noticed anything strange about yourself or Kian? Lyra hesitated. This was the moment she had dreaded, the moment she would have to admit to Evelyn that she wasn't just a normal kid. I think so, she whispered. Sometimes, when I'm upset or scared, things move. Like, without me touching them, Evelyn's heart sank. And Kian? He hasn't said anything, but he's been having strange dreams lately. About a palace, I think. He doesn't tell me much, but I know they're bothering him. Evelyn nodded, her suspicions confirmed. Whatever the twins were, their powers were tied to their true heritage. But the real question was, could they control it? And more importantly, what did this mean for their future? Before they could discuss it further, Kian appeared in the doorway, looking pale and shaken. We have to go, he blurted out. I had another dream, but this time it wasn't just a dream, it felt real. They're coming for us. The Drak'arans, they know where we are. Evelyn stood, her protective instincts kicking in. Pack your things, she ordered. We're leaving. As the twins hurried to gather their belongings, Evelyn quickly formulated a plan. They couldn't stay on Earth. If what the stranger had said was true, they were no longer safe here. The Drak'arans were a relentless force, and if they had found the twins once, they would find them again. Their only option was to leave the planet and seek out allies, perhaps even the remnants of the Illyrian people, if any still existed. But as they were preparing to leave, the stranger appeared again. This time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a group of heavily armed figures, their faces obscured by helmets, their weapons trained on the house. Going somewhere? The stranger asked, his voice smooth but menacing. Evelyn stepped forward, shielding the twins behind her. You're not taking them, she said firmly. I don't care who you are. The stranger chuckled, shaking his head. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't about you or them. It's about the power they possess, the power they don't even know how to control. If they don't come with me, the Drak'arans will destroy everything in their path to get to them. You'd be doing them a favor by handing them over now. Kian clenched his fists, a surge of anger bubbling inside him. He could feel something stirring beneath the surface, something he couldn't quite grasp but knew was dangerous. "We're not going anywhere with you," he said through gritted teeth. The stranger's expression darkened. "I was hoping you'd say that." With a flick of his wrist, he signaled his men to advance. But before they could take a single step, the ground beneath them rumbled, and the air crackled with energy. Lyra's eyes widened in fear as objects in the house began to shake, lifting off the ground as if pulled by an invisible force. Kian's anger had triggered something inside him, something powerful. The stranger's men hesitated, glancing at each other nervously as the house trembled. The stranger himself, however, remained calm, his eyes narrowing in interest. "Ah, so the boy has begun to awaken his abilities. This should be interesting." Evelyn grabbed the twins by the shoulders, pulling them back. "We need to leave now," she whispered urgently. But before they could make their escape, the stranger raised a hand and the tremors stopped abruptly. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice cold and final. "Not until you understand the truth." With a wave of his hand, the room around them seemed to shimmer, and suddenly they were no longer in Evelyn's house. Instead, they found themselves standing in a vast chamber made of gleaming crystal, the very palace Kian had seen in his dreams. Lyra gasped, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. This is the Illyrian palace, the stranger finished for her. The place you should have grown up. The place where your ancestors ruled for millennia. Before it was destroyed, Evelyn looked around in confusion. "What is this? How did we get here?" The stranger smiled. "A mere projection of the past. Nothing more. But it's important you see it. The Illyrian throne holds more than just power. It holds the key to an ancient technology that can change the fate of entire worlds. Your children, Evelyn, are the only ones who can unlock it." Lyra and Kian exchanged glances, their minds reeling from the revelation. They were more than just heirs to a throne. They were the keepers of something far greater, something that could either save or destroy the galaxy. The stranger continued, his voice echoing through the crystal chamber. "You have a choice to make, Lyra and Kian. You can come with me, unlock the throne, and restore the Illyrian Empire. Or you can defy me and watch as the Drak'arans tear the galaxy apart in search of the power they desire." Kian stepped forward, his eyes blazing with determination. "We're not going to be your pawns. We'll find our own way." The stranger's smile faded. "So be it. But know this. The throne will not wait forever. If you do not claim it, someone else will." The vision faded, and they were back in Evelyn's house. The stranger and his men were gone, leaving behind an eerie silence. Evelyn turned to the twins, her expression grave. "What are we going to do?" Kian and Lyra looked at each other, the weight of their responsibility settling heavily on their shoulders. They had a choice to make: embrace their royal heritage and the power that came with it, or forge a new path, free from the expectations of their past. But whatever choice they made, one thing was certain: their lives would never be the same again. The next few days passed in a blur of uncertainty. Evelyn, Lyra, and Kian packed their belongings and moved into hiding, taking refuge in an old military bunker Evelyn had access to from her days in the Earth Defense Fleet. But even here, in the cold safety of the underground shelter, the weight of their decisions bore down on them. Lyra paced the length of the bunker, her mind racing with the revelations of the past few days. The Illyrian throne wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a weapon, a relic of their ancestors' dark past. Her heart ached with the knowledge that her people, whom she had always imagined as noble and just, had once been conquerors. How could she and Kian possibly embrace that legacy? Kian, meanwhile, sat in silence, staring at the glowing tablet in front of him. He had been studying the archives Evelyn had recovered from her military contacts, files on the Drak'arans, the Illyrians, and the ancient conflict that had destroyed their homeworld. But no matter how much information he gathered, nothing seemed to make the path ahead any clearer. "They used it," Lyra whispered, breaking the silence. "The throne. They used it to control the Drak'arans. to force them into submission. That's why they rebelled. Kian didn't look up. I know. Lyra stopped pacing and turned to face him. So what do we do? If we take the throne, we're no better than our ancestors. But if we don't, the Drak'arans will destroy everything in their search for it. Kian finally lifted his gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and confusion. I don't know, Lyra. I don't know. Evelyn, who had been quietly listening from the corner of the room, stood and walked over to them. You two are different from your ancestors, she said softly. You've grown up here on Earth. You understand things they didn't. You don't have to repeat their mistakes. Lyra shook her head. But how can we not? The throne is a weapon. If we claim it, we'll be responsible for whatever happens next. Kian clenched his fists. Maybe it's not about the throne at all. Maybe it's about what we choose to do with it. The tension in the air grew as they realized that time was running out. The Drak'arans weren't far behind. Evelyn had intercepted a transmission indicating that they were searching for the twins, narrowing their location with each passing day. They couldn't stay in hiding forever. One night, while Kian slept fitfully, Lyra slipped out of the bunker and into the cold, moonlit forest above. The fresh air helped clear her mind, but it did little to soothe her inner turmoil. She felt the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her shoulders, the responsibility of a past she never asked for, and a future she couldn't control. As she wandered through the trees, her thoughts swirling, she noticed something strange. Lights flickering in the distance. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the moonlight, but as she approached, she realized the lights were forming patterns, almost like a message. Suddenly, a voice echoed in her mind, an ancient, melodic voice that felt both familiar and foreign. Lyra, she froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Who's there? The voice didn't respond, but the lights shifted again, arranging themselves into a symbol she recognized from Kian's dreams. The throne. You must decide, Lyra, the voice whispered. The throne's power will be claimed one way or another. Will you choose to wield it, or will you let it fall into the hands of those who seek to destroy everything you love? Lyra clenched her fists, torn between the burden of her heritage and the fear of what the throne's power could do. She had seen the damage that power could cause. Whole worlds reduced to ash, civilizations wiped from existence. But she had also seen the destruction the Drak'arans were capable of. If they found the throne, they would use it to complete their conquest of the galaxy, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. Before she could respond, the lights faded and the voice disappeared. Lyra stood alone in the dark forest, her decision looming larger than ever. The next morning, Lyra told Kian and Evelyn about the vision. Kian's eyes widened in shock. The throne reached out to you? Lyra nodded. It wants me to decide. It's waiting for us to claim it, or for someone else to. Kian frowned, his mind racing. But if we don't take it, the Drak'arans will. And if they do, we're all doomed. Evelyn crossed her arms, her expression grim. Then it sounds like you two don't have much of a choice. Lyra shook her head. No, we have a choice. The throne may be powerful, but it's also dangerous. If we claim it, we have to make sure we don't repeat the mistakes of our ancestors. Kian's face hardened. And if we destroy it, Lyra hesitated. If we destroy it, we might save the galaxy, but we could also lose any chance of restoring our people. Evelyn stepped forward, placing a hand on Lyra's shoulder. Whatever you decide, you won't be alone. I'll be with you every step of the way. Kian nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. We'll do this together. But first, we need to find the throne before the Drak'arans do. The race to find the Illyrian throne began. Using the coordinates Kian had deciphered from his dreams and the ancient archives, the trio set out on a dangerous journey across the galaxy. They traveled to forgotten planets, dodged Drak'aran patrols, and navigated treacherous alliances with former Illyrian allies who were skeptical of the twins' intentions. As they drew closer to the throne's location, they encountered resistance from the Drak'arans, who were hot on their trail. Skirmishes broke out, and Lyra and Kian were forced to tap into the latent powers they had been trying to suppress. In one particularly intense battle, Lyra discovered that her ability to move objects with her mind was growing stronger. She could sense the energy around her, manipulate it, and even use it to shield Kian and Evelyn from the Drak'arans' attacks. But with each use of her power, she felt a darkness creeping in, a temptation to unleash the full force of the Illyrian legacy, a force that could be as destructive as it was protective. Kian, too, struggled with his newfound abilities. His dreams had become more vivid, more intense, and he began to see visions of the future. Visions of the throne, glowing with power, and of himself sitting upon it, ruling over a galaxy in turmoil. The temptation was growing, and he feared that if he claimed the throne, he might lose himself to the same ambition that had consumed their ancestors. Finally, after weeks of searching, they arrived at the throne's resting place, a vast, ancient citadel hidden deep within a desolate planet on the edge of the galaxy. The citadel was massive, its walls adorned with symbols of Illyrian royalty, and at its center stood the throne itself, gleaming with an otherworldly light. As they approached, Kian and Lyra felt the weight of their decision pressing down on them. The throne's power was palpable, and they knew that whoever claimed it would shape the future of the galaxy. But before they could make their move, the Drak'arans arrived. Led by a powerful warlord, they stormed the citadel, determined to take the throne for themselves. A fierce battle erupted. Lyra and Kian fought side by side, using their powers to fend off the Drak'arans, while Evelyn provided cover with her blaster. But the Drak'arans were relentless, and the warlord's forces were closing in. In the chaos, Kian found himself standing before the throne. Its energy pulsed, calling out to him, tempting him to sit and claim his destiny. But as he reached out, Lyra's voice cut through the noise. "Kian, don't," she shouted, her eyes filled with fear. "If you sit on that throne, it will consume you. You've seen what it can do." Kian hesitated, torn between the power he could wield and the danger it posed. "But if I don't, the Drak'arans will take it." Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. "There's another way. We don't have to claim the throne. We can destroy it, end the cycle of violence once and for all." With the Drak'aran warlord closing in, Lyra's mind raced. The throne, alive and sentient, had been the orchestrator of all the chaos. It had manipulated her and Kian's ancestors, lured them into becoming conquerors, and was now trying to do the same to them. But now, she could feel its desperation, its need for someone to sit upon it, to wield its power and continue the cycle. But Lyra wasn't going to let that happen. "We can't let it control us," she said, turning to Kian, who stood frozen before the throne. "If we destroy it, we break the cycle. We take away its power for good." Kian looked at her, his expression conflicted. "But how? The throne is ancient, indestructible." Lyra shook her head. "No, it's not. It feeds off the energy of its ruler. If we refuse it, if we don't let it control us, it will collapse." The Drak'aran warlord, towering and fierce, stepped forward, his voice a growl. "Foolish children, you think you can resist the throne's power? It will take what it wants, whether you choose it or not." With a roar, he lunged for the throne, intent on claiming it for himself. But before he could reach it, Kian, fueled by a surge of protectiveness for Lyra and Evelyn, stepped in his way. Using the power he had been afraid to embrace, he summoned a force field that sent the warlord flying backward. Evelyn, standing behind them, shouted, "Lyra, do it now." Lyra nodded. She reached out with her mind, focusing all her energy on the throne. She could feel it pulling at her, trying to draw her in, but she resisted. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she concentrated, her hands trembling from the effort. "Kian, help me," she cried out. Kian turned away from the warlord, realizing that the real battle wasn't with the Drak'arans, but with the throne itself. Together, he and Lyra focused their powers, channeling all their strength into rejecting the throne's influence. The citadel trembled, and the throne began to crack, its once glistening surface now splintering under the force of their combined will. The sentient energy within it screamed in fury, but Lyra and Kian didn't waver. With a final surge of power, they shattered the throne. The explosion of energy sent a shockwave through the citadel, knocking the Drak'arans off their feet and sending debris flying in all directions. The throne, the source of so much power and conflict, was gone, reduced to nothing more than dust and scattered shards of crystal. As the dust settled, Lyra and Kian stood in the center of the now destroyed citadel, breathing heavily but victorious. The Drak'arans, realizing the throne was no more, retreated. Their warlord, defeated and weakened, scowled at the twins before turning and disappearing into the shadows with his forces. Evelyn approached the twins, her face etched with relief. "You did it," she said, pulling them into a hug. "You broke the cycle." Lyra nodded, though she still felt the weight of what they had done. The throne was never meant to be wielded by anyone. It was only a tool of destruction. Kian sighed, exhaustion setting in. But now it's gone. No one can use it ever again. As they stood together in the ruined citadel, the three of them realized that, while their journey had been difficult, they had succeeded in what truly mattered, ending the reign of a power that had caused so much pain and suffering across the galaxy. Weeks later, the twins and Evelyn returned to Earth. Life was quieter now, though far from normal. Lyra and Kian still had their powers, but they no longer feared them. They had learned to control their abilities, using them only when necessary and never to harm others. News of the throne's destruction spread across the galaxy, and with it came a sense of hope. Without the Illyrian throne to fight over, many of the warring factions began to seek peace, realizing that there was no longer a weapon to claim. The Drak'arans, too, retreated to their homeworld, no longer obsessed with conquest. As for Lyra and Kian, they found a new sense of purpose. They would never be ordinary, but they didn't need to be rulers or warriors either. Instead, they decided to use their abilities to help others, to heal the wounds caused by the throne's legacy, and to ensure that no one else would fall victim to the same cycle of power and destruction. And so, though their journey had been fraught with danger and uncertainty, Lyra and Kian had found their place, not as heirs to a throne, but as protectors of peace, determined to shape a future where no one would suffer under the weight of power again.